Well, thanks very much for inviting me here. I couldn't really work out whether I've got the best slot of the weekend or the worst slot of the weekend, right? In some ways, most of you have had several glasses of wine to drink, so you may be a bit more forgiving, but you may also be a bit more impatient. So, so I will limit my remarks to finish by, well, certainly before 11:30. And the first thing I really wanted to say is what a truly fantastic gathering this is. I think it's been not before time that we try to get young people together to discuss and campaign and argue about the cause of freedom in this country. So huge thanks to Steve, who's doing a fantastic job of our education. But also to Simon and Christiana at the Freedom Association, and also to Anton as well. This really is the launch of UK Liberty League, which I think is going to be a huge step forward in the years to come. And Will and James as well. Sorry. That's the bloody problem, you see, when you start to these Oscar speeches. There's a tricky thing really about the cause we're fighting, because it's really about ideas, and a lot of people are pretty cynical in politics and economics about ideas at the moment. I remember one of my great heroes, I think one of the truly greatest advocates for free markets and freedom, P.J. O'Rourke. He was being interviewed some years ago by Clive Anderson on television, and Clive Anderson definitely thought he was going to get the better of this American polemicist, and so said, "So, if I've got this right, back at university you were a Marxist-Leninist, is that correct?" And P.J. O'Rourke just nodded and said, "Yes, that's correct, I was indeed." "You were sort of a form of left-wing revolutionary, is that correct?" He said, "Yes, that's absolutely correct. I sold socialist newspapers and promulgated socialist ideas. And now you are a free market Republican." "Yes, that's correct as well." So, "Well, would you care to explain how that transformation occurred?" And O'Rourke looked at him as if he was mad and said, "Yes, I got a job." But I don't actually think most people are quite as cynical as P.J. O'Rourke pretended. I actually think we can win a battle of ideas, and we need to invest in people. It's great to be at a sort of a classical liberal event in which I think I'm probably the oldest 5 or 10% of people in the room, because you guys are the future bankers, businessmen, journalists, academics, movie makers. The world will be yours to inherit. I've got no doubt that a number of you will actually go on to work directly in politics or think tanks. Word of warning about that, though, word of warning. I've worked in sort of political communications and think tanks for all of what passes for my professional life. And it can be quite a difficult task, particularly on the libertarian side. I can remember quite clearly when I turned up for my first pseudo job. I made sure, which isn't usually what I'm good at, but I got in very early that morning, and I was sat at my desk, and about 5 minutes later my boss came in, and huge bloody great bloke, my boss came in. Said, "Oh, Littlewood, terrific to see you." I said, "Well, thank you, sir, it's terrific to be here." And because you've started today, we're going to organise a party. Oh, well, I'm definitely on the right side of the argument here. It seems to be a sort of good libertarian approach to take. We're going to organise a party. I said, "Well, I'm very honoured, that sounds terrific." He said, "There's going to be lots of drinking. Lots of drinking." I said, "Well, that's fine, I've got a pretty good track record on drinking." He said, "Lots and lots of drinking." I said, "Well, that sounds terrific. And there's probably going to be some fighting." And I said, "Well, I may look a bit thin, but I'm quite live. I think I'll probably do that." So there's lots of drinking with and probably a little bit of fighting. I said, "Well, that sounds fun." He said, there'll probably be some sex as well." I said, well, I get it. Sounds like a part. He said, lots of drinking, lots and lots of drinking, probably some fighting and a bit of sex. I said, well, when would you like me to turn up? Well, it's entirely up to you. It'll only be the two of us. So beware before you actually know what the theory comes. Now, I'm supposed to say something about the sort of state of the free market cause in Britain today, and what we can do about it, and how we can move it on. And I'm reminded of one of the great heroes of Western politics over the past 40 or 50 years, Richard Milhouse Nixon. Who said that was ironic, by the way. Who said that all of politics was really determined by fear and hatred. That was his view. And I think that's too disappointing of you. You do need to understand your enemy, of course. You do need to understand why people disagree with you. You need to understand the huge middle ground that you can win over. But I'm not so sure that Nixon's right. That said, I'm doing the best I can to get into the mindset of the 250,000 people who marched through London against the cuts government. I don't mean the tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people who are against all forms of branded capitalism and therefore throw paint on the window of a Santander bank whilst wearing a Nike shirt. It's a true story. It's really called I'm sure it's right. I mean, you must have heard this already, that the socialists who decided to go and occupy Fortnum and Mason, it was all a piece of total confusion. It was just 100 of them who actually thought that proper tea was theft. But what about the 250,000 chaps who were actually marching with streets, seem to be worried, seem to be concerned? Well, some of them probably have every reason to be concerned. 400,000 jobs are going to be lost in the public sector. They probably aren't real jobs. Wow. They probably are not real jobs, but there are real people who are having them. I have to say it's a strange way if you're fighting to keep your own job. It strikes me as being a slightly strange thing to do, to sort of hold up a placard and demand that you're given a pay rise and right outside your boss's house. And every time I piss off one of the IEA staff members, they don't turn up at my flat waving a placard. They get pretty short shrift if they did. Some of the people on the march are clearly mad. Ed Miliband believed that this was equivalent to the anti-apartheid movement. I think most are just extremely unimaginative. The biggest cry seems to be that the bankers caused this crisis, so the bankers should pay for this crisis. No, but it is true that the bankers, a number of bankers, did a number of wrong things. But I don't remember the Socialist Workers' Party, when the sun was shining, saying, well, the private sector's caused this profit, so it would be quite wrong for this to be spent in the public sector. We won't accept any of this money. It's only on the downside. And I think actually amongst the sort of ordinary folk on that march, there was an inability to distinguish between things. You couldn't distinguish, for example, between the National Health Service and the nation's health. It just strikes them as being impossible to, that you could tamper or cut back or get rid of the National Health Service without undermining the nation's health. They can't see these as two different things. Or the welfare state being the same as the welfare of the people who live in this country. Again, couldn't distinguish between those two things. And what seemed to unite them was that they were just all against the cuts, if they were asked, all for various different reasons. Many of them seemed to believe in the magic money fairy that could pay for all their particular projects. And many of them had their own special pet projects. I think we've actually got to try and explain to people that there are ways of bringing good things about that doesn't involve the government. The health of the nation is not the same as the National Service. Now, one of the more dangerous things I do as the Director General of the IEA, in addition to probably drinking too much, is that I'm determined to go round and meet these sort of people from the public sector and try and work out what motivates them. So, for example, I went and spoke at the meeting of the Chief Fire Officers Union,